Hi everyone, thanks for watching. You can support our work on our website ageoftruth.tv. And please like our videos, subscribe to our channels on YouTube, BitChute and Brighteon. And remember to hit the bell for notifications. And follow us on Instagram and Facebook. To be sure not to miss any of our shows, you can sign up for our newsletter on our website ageoftruth.tv.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Age of Truth TV. I'm Lucas Alexander in Copenhagen, Denmark. It's the 11th of June 2024, and we welcome you to this roundtable discussion featuring two fascinating and well-informed authors, researchers, spiritual and esoteric philosophers, and truth speakers from Britain. She is a poetry writer, lecturer, and media personality. He is a very successful author of a new book, The Invasion of Eden, a lecturer, the host of Fifth Kind TV, and a former minister in the Church of England. Paul Anthony Wallis and T.C. Arkle. Good morning from Copenhagen, Denmark, and hello to all of our viewers on Age of Truth TV. Please like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell for notifications. We have an absolutely fascinating and exciting show for you today, a roundtable discussion featuring two fascinating authors and lecturers and great personalities. And it's a thrill for me to welcome on the show from Queensland, Australia, Paul Anthony Wallis, and from the West Country in Britain, T.C. Arkle. I'm so thrilled to have both of you with me today.
Thrilled to be with you both.
G'day, Lucas. It's great to be with you both.
So wonderful. This is going to be an amazing conversation, I'm sure, because what was so fascinating, I've had both of you on my show, and what was interesting was that within the span of 12 hours, I did both of my most recent shows with both of you at the same time. And what was so extraordinary was that we touched upon so many of the same topics and subject matters. And it was quite fascinating to see how aligned I felt that you two were. So this is why we're doing this today. And I think the viewers will have such a thrill listening to what you have to share today. And also it will be fascinating to see how you will complement each other or bring something fascinating to the table. So I'm just really thrilled to see both of you.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise.
Let's hope we don't disappoint.
I'm sure you won't. So I'd like to begin with you, TC. Do you think that there is a specific reason for you now to be a speaker of truth, of spirituality and the esoteric, and to go public about some rather controversial subject matters? Was this always in the cards for you, do you think, TC?
Yes, I think it was always on the cards for me. I like to think that I came here to be a tool for the all that is, to be here to serve the highest good, not just of myself, but of all mankind, us being united, I believe, as one and serving the one. So when I look back on my life, I see certain signposts that indicated that perhaps I was here to speak out. I certainly don't and never have had a problem speaking out, oftentimes when it was uncomfortable and when other people felt it was uncomfortable to do so. So I'm here to do the best that I can to reveal what, truth is a big word, and we can drop that word easily, but everybody has their own truth. I think ultimately we need to find a way to all come home to a larger truth in which we can all feel safe and included and work for the higher good.
Do you feel that you're more safe now? You use that word, doing it now, standing in your own truth, having awakened to what is actually going on in the world, a new alternative understanding, not the one we were all brought up with and what we all were led to believe through the media and families and whatever, everybody around us. But suddenly we all have this awakening. I mean, do you think, have you had it for a long time, or is it more recent and now you feel it's the right time for you to speak publicly about it?
I think we're all sort of waking up and becoming more aware. Certainly, there's a lot of people in my everyday life that I'm meeting that I wouldn't have thought would be as aware or as open to unusual information, who are surprising me by their openness to unusual, shall we say, information that maybe a couple of years ago would not have been in the part of our common mindset. So I think that we're certainly in an age of enlightenment. We certainly have moved into the age of Aquarius. And I feel that the planets are lining up for us all to get on board this train, should we feel inclined.
Right. So since our last show in the beginning of 2024, TC, a lot has happened in the world, not necessarily for the better, but do you feel that there is any sign at all whatsoever of a change for the better? And are we getting to a better place, or are we moving faster and faster into this long planned new world order, physical and psychological prison?
Well, it's really interesting because science in quantum theory has come to the understanding that consciousness affects reality. I've been studying Kabbalah for over 15 years, and again, they believe that our consciousness creates our reality. Therefore, if we want a positive outcome, our consciousness has to be in a positive state. So I certainly try and keep my consciousness in a positive place. We can see, for example, on the television and the Netflix channels, that they're trying to do a good job of dissociating us from any positive outcome with programs about death and destruction of this planet and each other. But certainly in terms of my mindset and my time-space construct, I am working full phase ahead to create a positive outcome, and I will continue to do so.
That's wonderful. Do you feel, I mean, have you strengthened yourself when you are facing perhaps some backlash or people in your surroundings or around you thinking that you're going down a strange and unusual path of being so suddenly outspoken, or maybe you always were?
Mm, yes, I always was. And I think that everything is a message and everything is a test. So there are going to be roadblocks and there are going to be people who don't agree with you. And that's okay. I think we have to be okay with, everything really. And whatever happens for a reason. I'm a big believer in those messages that the universe sends us, and the fact that the universe is a mirror, and we are in a construct where we are working with the universe, with that mirror, for the highest good of all. But that takes each one of us. Each one of us is a microcosm of the macrocosm. So each one of us is doing the work in our tiny universe to create a positive, hopefully, to then manifest that change. So in Kabbalah, for example, there are only 600,000 souls on this earth. So each one of us is a part of a bigger soul. because obviously there's a lot more than 600,000 souls on this earth. So if I correct parts in my construct, I'm supporting the bigger picture or the soul family that I'm a part of. And for example, if you repair your own construct, your own life, and do the work in your own life, you will feel the knock-on effect in your ancestral line going backwards and forwards in time. So each one of us has that responsibility, I believe, to do the work, regardless of what's happening around us.
Absolutely. That's great. So, Paul Anthony Wallis, you've just published a new book, another one, a fascinating one, The Invasion of Eden, which I understand is doing very well. And you have so much to share always. It's so fascinating. It's wonderful to have you with us again. Always a thrill. So I'd like, well, before you go into just a little bit about the content, or at least the headlines of the book, the content of your book, please also address this question I asked TC. Since our show, also in the beginning of 2024, a lot has happened in the world. Do you think there's a change for the better, or are we seeing this faster and faster implementation of the New World Order and the enslavement of the mind and the physical manifestation here?
Well, thank you for that question, Lucas. I would really want to echo everything you just said, TC, because I have experienced this acceleration you're describing as well. I think we're in a very interesting moment in terms of people waking up, to use that phrase. In the personal coaching that I've been doing over the last couple of years, I've been amazed to find people of every age coming to me and saying, I no longer believe what I did. Maybe even only 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. I don't buy into the worldview I was sold as a child anymore. And I've got an appetite on me to know what's real, to know who we really are, what we're really capable of. People from their 20s into their 90s are saying this to me. And I think that's unusual. I think to have that kind of appetite on that broad a cross section of people is unusual. And I think there are lots of reasons for it. I think we're in the age of the internet where people can follow their curiosity. We have had a period of an international health emergency where people had the opportunity to sit down in front of Google and YouTube and follow their curiosity that way, and potentially make contact with people who were thinking similar things or had had similar experiences that had dislocated them from the mainstream. And in that way, we've been able to encourage each other to think new things and to think outside the box. So there are some nuts and bolts reasons for this acceleration that we're seeing. But I am beginning to suspect that there are other reasons too for this shift. And if I can put it this way, when I was involved in the world of ministry, because I was 33 years in church-based ministry, I did a lot of work taking people on retreat and would go to the most wonderful retreat centers around the world. And through that work, I began to discover there are these places which our ancestors would refer to as thin places. So these are places where the veil between our normal limited perceptual field and other dimensions is somehow thinner. And people in those places find it easier to see and hear things from outside of their usual realm and have transpersonal experiences that are just mind-boggling compared with their normal day-to-day experience. The ancients called these thin places, and I wonder if our whole planet as a living organism has entered a thin place in our cosmos, if our solar system is in a slightly different quadrant of space, if the galaxy is rotated to a point where we are all in a thin place, where we are actually having more transformative, transpersonal experiences than before, and finding it better able to perceive and imagine things beyond what has been normal for us. This is just me guessing, but I feel that there is this layer to it as well. And it's certainly reflected in the conversations I have with people. It makes now a really exciting time to be a researcher or a seeker or a truth teller, because I think there's an appetite and a receptivity for it that is something new.
Absolutely. And it's wonderful to see how many people are waking up at the moment. And actually, we've seen that in quite some years now, especially in the last 4 years. But just in the last, let's say, 19 years that I have been on my path, when I started in 2020, no, in 2005, when I had my so-called awakening, I felt so alone. I had nowhere to go. I had to find little groups and people and could not talk to a
Mm.
lot of people about it, especially being an artist. It was difficult. So you had to kind of live two different lives. But
Yeah.
nowadays, it's amazing how many people, also from strange places that you never knew would go on this
Yes.
path, suddenly they are there, and it's wonderful.
And TC, to echo what you said, I have been greatly surprised by some of the people who responded positively to the very stretching material that I put out there in my books. And I find retired clergy surprisingly receptive. And I've been blown away by my own parents, who, when I was growing up, seemed like pretty conservative people, but they have. My mum passed away last year, but my mum and my dad have been really receptive to the work I've been doing in the recent years, where I've been talking about interdimensional experiences, extraterrestrial experiences, spiritual emergences, Kundalini awakenings. And I would never have imagined when I was a boy that I could have conversations about those things with my mum and dad, but they are and have been very awake to these things. I get a lot of pushback as well from people who just want to stay, on the rails, so to speak. But I am frequently surprised by the people who say, yes, I've wondered that for a long time. In fact, this thing happened to me.
It's interesting also, Paul, what you say about the thinning of the veil. And I've been spending a lot of time doing retreats to places of sacred energy sites, especially here in the United Kingdom. And I'm going back to Mary Magdalene sites in France shortly. And it's
Oh,
interesting
wonderful.
that, yes, and it's interesting that pretty much all of the religious sites are built on more ancient sites of understanding and knowing. So they're literally plugging into that original cipher, that original energy source, by simply placing their place of divine worship on top of those original, I don't want to say pagan, but original energy source vortexes. And obviously this planet, which is living, as you said, is a living being, has these beautiful points of entry and exit, and where the veil is thin. And in fact, I read something the other day that said that the reason why we're fighting over Israel is because there is a stargate there, and that the whole point of this war is to gain access to this stargate. So,
Yes.
when we understand that there is literally a war going on to gain power over these sacred points on our beautiful planet, it's very interesting to realign our sights and to look at what's going on in terms of this ancient understanding. So many of the great sacred tools have been taken, and probably in the Vatican or other places that we have no access to anymore. But I've been doing quite a lot of reading recently about the feminine sacred ancestry, which is really interesting, because I feel that although we are now in very much a patriarchal balance, as it were, and prior to that, our worldview was very much the matriarchal, and came from a sacred understanding of the earth and the powers of the earth. For me, the whole point of this journey that we're going through is to find a balance between the male and the female. And but what I really urge anybody who's interested in some of the feminine mysteries and where we're coming to. This is an amazing book called Womb Awakening by a beautiful couple. And it really has opened my mind to some of the ways in which the energies have been reversed by the patriarchy. So, for example, in matriarchal societies, which in themselves we know fell, but did fall, I believe, because they in themselves became imbalanced, And what's interesting to read about is the fact that the blood rights of the feminine were originally centered around the menstrual bloods, and those bloods were very sacred and very powerful. And what happened when the patriarchy came was that they then took the sacredness of those blood rights and turned them into blood sacrifice. So that's what we see with the cabal. We see this complete reversal of the power of the feminine and being used. We hear things about how it's being, young children are being sacrificed and all this other really unpleasant, unpalatable stuff. But I find it really interesting that so much of, shall we call, the negative energies are taking what was originally a positive, a sort of a beautiful thing, and turning it on its head and making it a negative thing. And
Yes.
I wanted to share something with you guys because it was something that I've just come across, and I think that it really does inform this conversation. The sacred power of menstrual blood in ancient tradition. So just to give some background to this, menstrual blood is an incredibly rich and magical substance in its physical properties, healing capacity, history, and central place in myth and legend. It was called soma in the tantric tradition, the Vedic ritual drink of immortality. In the Rig Veda, the soma mandala contains 114 hymns praising its energizing qualities. It was euphemistically referred to as the juice from the stalk of a plant, tree of life, that was the god of the gods, the mother god. It was called Amrita in the Persian tradition, the elixir of life. It is called the flower and the life-giving river in many Indian traditions. In Indian mythology, the mother goddess Kali Maya invited all the other gods to drink her menstrual blood, her fountain of life, and because of that, they ascended into the heavens. Even the Bible calls menstrual blood the flower in Leviticus. It was the holy grail of Celtic Grail in the Arthurian legends, and was also known as claret wine in the European legends that conferred enlightenment to the king who drank it. It was known as ambrosia in the Greek legends, the nectar of the gods, and in Greece it was also known as the supernatural red wine given by Hera to nourish the other gods. In Celtic mythology, Taliesin came to power by tasting liquid from the mother goddess's cauldron, symbolic of menses. Egyptian pharaohs became divine by ingesting the menstrual blood of Isis. In China, etc., etc. So for me, it's really interesting as a student of the goddess to see how much of what we take for granted these days, we see the menstrual and the feminine as dirty, and we want to get rid of it, and yet we transpose that into something where the bloods are then used as blood sacrifice, So I think very much I feel we're trying to rebalance the cosmos these days to give ourselves back to the earth. We're so connected at the moment to God on high, God in heaven. We've lost our connection to heaven on earth. And for me personally, a lot of my practice now is about reconnecting with Mother Earth, because all of our religions have been about looking upwards, and we've forgotten our connection to the earth, to our blood connection to the earth, our physical connection to the earth. And in all of the great traditions, of Inanna, of Isis, of Jesus Christ on the cross, we know that they had to die and give their body back to the earth to then rise. Just like a supernova has to go inwards and implode before it can explode. We have to go into the earth, into the sacred rites of Mother Earth, of the goddess, before we can rise out to God the Father, as it were. So for me personally, I find it really interesting that we have in current thinking really tried to escape the earth with our rocket ships and our, we really haven't given ourselves fully to the earth. We're corrupting the earth, we're destroying the earth, and yet here is heaven on earth.
It's so fascinating what you're saying, TC, and you're quite ahead of me actually with some of the questions I prepared. So this is wonderful. But there is these interesting testimonies from these former MK Ultra mind-controlled slaves that confided to David Icke and to several others that what they saw during these satanic rituals was part of these elite groups that were actually drinking menstrual blood and getting a high from it. And I guess that also explains adrenochrome, which they apparently drink as well. TT, can I just get your thoughts on that? Because this is so totally what you're talking about, actually, just from another point of view.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think that all of this is tying in, and obviously those people whose powers I think are darker in terms of the way they're using the blood rights, of course they understand the power of the menstrual blood, which was used and was drunk, the body of Christ, the blood of Christ. I mean, Jesus's relationship to Mary Magdalene, they were one being, just as we all search for our male and female parts to come into coexistence. And I think you're right that these blood rights are being used. And also a friend of mine told me the other day that some real horror stories that she was able to perceive, which is that, even when the baby, they would basically be creating this situation where the child would still be attached to the mother, and they would open up the stomach and drink from, the baby and the mother, as it were. And I think it's this complete reversal of the sacred, of the mother. And it's the most heinous possible way that you can imagine all of this beauty and sovereign and glory that is being subjected for easy access power, longevity. I mean, there is, I heard somebody say the other day that, maybe some of the beings that are currently on our planet do not have that endless life cycle that we have, and therefore this is a way for them to perpetuate their existence here. Whatever it is, and I never claim to know. I am just a seeker, and I listen and I keep my ears open because I'm interested. To me, what is fascinating is how the original, the true, the beautiful, life-giving substance, because literally menstruation, if it doesn't become a baby, it goes back into the earth. That's what used to happen, is women would sit and give their blood back to the earth.
I think this is fascinating and very controversial probably for a lot of viewers, but it's important to know. Paul,
yes,
please address this also. Do you think that these elite people that drink the menstrual blood, doing the blood sacrifices, the child sacrifices, do you think that they are actually human and psychopaths without empathy, or do you think that they are actually alien ET beings taking human form?
All right, I'll come to that second, but first of all, I just want to affirm, TC, what you were sharing there, because I have found in my research into the Bible that in the past, there was a real appreciation of the divine feminine that was part of the Hebrew tradition. And there was a cultural memory of helpers in the deep past who supported the progress of humanity, who were female helpers. And they were sort of summarized in the character of Asherah. The Egyptian name is Hathor. She's the lion lady. She is the being who came and raised us from living in animal subsistence on the planet's surface to learning about farming, learning which plants are good for food, which are good for medicines, which are good to avoid, which are good for turning on our higher cognitive powers. Asherah was the great nurturer of humanity, and was honored that way within Judaism into the 8th and 7th century BCE. And at that point in history, some kings came along who worshipped Yahweh, and they decided everyone in the kingdom should worship their God, and they would get rid of every other being that was ever remembered or commemorated or honored. And that meant getting rid of Asherah. That meant getting rid of all that nurture, all that cultural formation. It meant getting rid of a person who was the totem of female wisdom. And by getting rid of her and executing all the priests that previous Jewish kings had employed and demolishing the temples that previous Jewish kings had built, they were really cutting off the people from 50% of who they were as human beings. And they were denying really the idea that there was a female contribution to the world beyond what was absolutely necessary. The idea of female wisdom, healing that comes through female wisdom, no thanks. We're just going with Yahweh. And of course, Yahweh was a violent character.
Yeah.
And so he served the kings because Yahweh's violence meant they could justify their own violence. It gave them total control, in effect, not only over the narrative, but over their kingdom, gave them the right to go to war, kill their enemies, do all kinds of evil because their God was a violent God. And so there was a very deliberate loss of balance, to use that word. And all the tutelage that we'd enjoyed that was about living in balance with the planet, because that was the Asherah teaching. And you can relate it to other female entities and other cultures all around the world. All that gets forgotten. And we're now in this controlling, dominating, violent mindset. And it even starts informing our idea of farming, so that it produces a model of farming that's about controlling the environment and suppressing natural processes. And it leads to, petrochemical type farming that's done on an industrial scale that obliterates the natural environment, replaces it with something that's chemically totally dependent. It all goes back to this very deliberate shift that was made. And I just pick up on these bizarre laws that the Yahweh character put forward that show that he had an absolute horror of menstrual blood. Menstruation was something horrific to Yahweh, and it should be regarded as filthy and awful. And of course, anyone reading the Bible today, thinking that Yahweh might be a name for God, thinks, wait a minute, something's not adding up here. How could God have a horror of something natural, something that is essential to having female human beings on the planet, something without which there would be no human beings on the planet? How could God have a problem with that? And the answer is that some of the God stories were not originally God stories. They were stories of this violent colonizing being, and the whole narrative got shifted over to that side, and the feminine got suppressed, forgotten, demonized. And you can draw a straight line from that to the persecution of women through the ages, the burning of women who were practicing medicine or even offering counseling to the rulers of the day if they offended the wrong person, or if they did it for the general public, for goodness sake, then all of a sudden they're at the stake. And there's a direct connection between that and this masculinizing of the worldview that was done in that period, the 8th to 6th century BCE. So that's the first half of my answer. So I meant everything you just said, TC.
Just nodding at everything that you're saying. So
Oh, good. And then the other half, the dark half of the story, that's interesting because you can find the roots for this in the Bible as well. All the language that was used to demonize other religions. Very often the narrators would say, well, they're the ones who do child sacrifice.
Yes.
But you get into the New Testament and you realize, oh no, there's a much longer story that goes on here that is to do, I think it does have a non-human origin of beings who are parasitic off of biological life, parasitic off of human life. So the Gnostics talked about the archons, for instance, who would feed off the lower vibrational energy of distressed human beings. And so they would manipulate humans to be more angry, more anxious, and then they'd feed off those emotions. And then there were other beings that I think we can take it in a much more concrete way, that they were deriving pleasure or energy from chemicals in the blood of human beings who were terrorized. And I think this is what often these death cults were about. It was about terrorizing human beings so that these other beings could predate off the fear and terror. I first saw this in a Jim Henson movie called The Dark Crystal, which when I watched it, I assumed was innocent fiction, where you've got these horrible, wicked, desiccated bird people running the planet and these innocent gelflings who were being abducted, and then their essence would be taken to rejuvenate the bird people. And unfortunately, the more I've studied the Bible and other ancestral narratives around the world, the more I've realized Jim Henson was telling us a deep truth about a layer of exploitation that has been part of the human experience for thousands and thousands of years. And in the research of my most recent book, The Invasion of Eden, I found that story is there in Hawaiian ancestral memory too, that when they tell of the coming of the Mo'o, the Ahumanu and the Kaunas, the same story is there. Years past, I worked as an archdeacon in the Anglican Church in Australia, so that's one down from a bishop. And so I was very involved in professional standards and in the Royal Commission, investigating institutional responses to the abuse of children. And I discovered this story hasn't gone away anywhere, that it is still current, just as it was in the past, and that we need to be far more aware and awake in terms of looking after each other and believing the stories of people who say they have suffered abuse in these kinds of organized, ritualized ways. It's not something I talk about a great deal, but it is in the new book, The Invasion of Eden, because I think we simply will not understand the world in which we live and why it works the way it does and how people in power tick. We won't understand until we realize this is a layer of the human experience and has been for a very long time.
Yes, I mean, I think certainly in my recent studies, I've been uncovering a lot of narratives, as you've just said, about how the Bible has been tampered with to such a degree. I mean, especially in terms of the feminine Aramaic and Hebraic words. You can see how I guess it was the Council of Nicaea who did a really good job on the Bible by taking out and putting in what they wanted. And as you say, Asherah and all of the goddess culture was eradicated from those texts, but also from society. They were rooted out. You know, the Cathars, they killed every last person who had an alternative viewpoint. And we can trace back through the language, through the Aramaic. I mean, if you listen to the Lord's Prayer in its original Aramaic, it's completely different from the version that we have access to. And you touched on something I just also want to refer to, which is the Elohim, which again, I do think we have this layer. You know, the Bible talks about the watchers. I believe there is the all that is. And then I believe there are these visitors, call them the watchers, call them aliens, whatever you want to call them. In so many texts that I've written and people that I follow, we have this conversation about the tampering with of the human genome. And in my study if you look at, for example, the tree of life, which we study in Kabbalah and in other Vedic studies as well, we see the tree of life. But in Kabbalah, they study the 10 points of the Sephirot. And actually, if you look at some of the deeper technologies, it is said that there was a tree of life that was a 12-point tree of life. So we're missing in a lot of our sacred geology, if you like, our geometry. There are pieces that have been kept from us, so we do not have the full power, the full knowledge. And certainly, I think when people talk about tampering with the human DNA, I do believe that as well, because on just a very general level, why are we so obsessed with superheroes? Because we know inherently that we're capable of so much more, that,
Yes.
we completely want, if you look at stories in the Bible, they did fly. They did fly, those fair prophets in the Bible. And I think, that our DNA was tampered with. And there are many people who, talk about this. And I think that we have been, as you say, dumbed down so that we will be better workers, or that they can farm our anger. And our divinity has been watered down on this planet. And so I think that a lot of what's happening now is we're reclaiming that. We can feel it now. Maybe, as you say, there's a thinning of the veil where we're beginning to get that sense of we're waking up literally from this dream where we've been, farmed, and
Yes.
realizing that actually we have so much more potential. And it's time now for us to reclaim that.
Definitely. I think one of the exciting things about remembering the feminine side of the story, remembering Asherah, remembering Hathor, remembering Venus, remembering Aphrodite, is that it reminds us that we are surrounded by company, some of which might want to exploit us, but some of it is here to support us and to support our progress as a species. And when we forget Asherah, we're forgetting the helpful side of things. And I think one of the unfortunate ways that conversation about ET contact is framed in the present day is it's often framed in a frightening, negative way. So when it was discussed last year in Washington, members of Congress were talking about existential threats and military threats. Whereas when we listen to the full breadth of our ancestral story, yes, there's a story of colonization, exploitation, but there are all these stories of support and of profound help for human beings to progress and become more than we already are. But there's a wonderful story I discovered out of the Mayan tradition that talks about what you were just mentioning, TC, the tampering with our DNA. And they tell this long story of how the feathered serpents produced us after long and painful attempts at genetic manipulation. And in the end, they got a Homo sapiens, sapiens, sapiens. So us, but we were smarter. Us, we were better at remote viewing, future viewing, far sight, telepathic connection, empathy, X-ray vision, all those superpowers that we feel within our bones we really should have. And then the feathered serpents say, we can't work with these humans. They're too smart. How can we ambush people who know when we're coming? How can we trick people who know what we're thinking? And they go back to their senior genetic engineer, Kukumats, and they say, can you dumb these humans down a bit so we can control them more easily? So he goes away and he does some experiments and he comes up with a vapor that when sprayed over human populations, brain damages them to the point where they're limited to their immediate perceptual realm, their 5 physical senses, and for any other information, they'll be dependent on an authority telling them what's what. And there's lots of interesting things about that story. And I mean, it reminds me of the 1970s when journalists were picking up on science showing that kids growing up in environments that were saturated with the fumes of idling traffic were growing up more aggressive and less intelligent. And of course, this was poo-pooed by the oil industry. No, that's not real science. But journalists persisted with it. The data was there, and they persisted with it to the point that now we're driving cars with unleaded fuel in them because we don't want to brain damage our children. And I can see a connection there. But the take home from that Mayan story is actually quite positive. And that is that if we can clean up our environment, if we will eat clean foods, drink clean water, get our air as clean as it can be, our brains will start operating a whole lot better. And the superpowers we all feel we should have will begin clicking back on, because it is actually still in our DNA. And you hear the language of that in other traditions. There was a wonderful Aboriginal Australian elder who passed away about a decade ago, I think, who used to speak in terms of, he used to say we had more DNA in the past. And what he meant was more of our DNA was switched on. And I think that's right. I think we all have the potential to operate at a higher level. And we've had traditions that have demonstrated it. You mentioned the Cathars, TC, a wonderful example of people who had run with esoteric information that had survived all the suppression, turned it into a lifestyle, and produced a society that really was more intelligent, more conscious, more harmonious. People like the Cathars show us what is possible when we have more of ourselves switched on.
Paul, may I just address your statement here about what the Mayans talk about, spraying the population with this substance? Isn't that exactly what we're experiencing now with chemtrails and with all of these, the food poisoning, all of these chemicals in our food and water, and fluoride, and all of that, also in the toothpaste and what have you? I mean, you're saying if we just stop doing that, but we are not doing this. We are being subjected to it. We are in this.
Yes.
You're engulfed
But
in this.
I think you're right. I think that is precisely why our ancestors gave us stories like that. The Mayan is just one example. There's a wonderful Nigerian example I could share as well that talked about the poisoning of the environment. And what it says to you and me is we need to be aware of these things and alert to these things. We need to fully expect that there'll be toxins being pumped into this, that, and the other, so that we can arm ourselves against it, so that we can be very deliberate and conscious in terms of what we consume, maybe even down to where we live. I mean, it is one of the reasons I live in rural Queensland, for instance, rather than in the heart of a big city. And I think our ancestors wanted us to be forearmed against all these kinds of devices.
But they're still spraying the woods and the rural areas and the country and all of that. We see that all the time. And
That's
then we are
true.
in this electromagnetic soup that even if you are in, let's just say, Africa or other places, I mean, there's still a lot, there's actually a lot of 5G there. Just saw it.
Yes,
Fluoride,
5G towers everywhere.
that's true.
they're trying to roll out fluoride in this country now, which we know is carcinogenic and affects mental functioning as well. It's quite frightening how many children are born with autism now, whereas in the Amish, there is none. So, you know, we only have to look at things like that to know that governments and the WHO, etc., they do not have our best interests at heart, because they're using technology on us that does not further the human genome, does not further the human condition. If anything, it's compromising it, as you say, with whatever it is that's being sprayed into the atmosphere, into the foods. And as you touched on earlier, Paul, the way in which farming is done, which strips the land, strips the food, to the point at which it's amazing any of us are still standing.
Yeah, I just want to say something also, TC. It's so fascinating to hear some of the things you're talking about, because this is part of my preparation. And you mentioned Mary Magdalene. What was interesting in our last talk, TC, and also with Paul, was that we both got to talk about Mary Magdalene. What I have discovered, because I've spoken to many about this, not being more interested in Mary Magdalene than a lot of other things, but what is happening now is that a lot of people talk about this Mary Magdalene energy that is coming into Earth in one way or the other. But why? What is that? What is Mary Magdalene? This is a question for you both. We can begin with you, TC. I mean, is Mary Magdalene in reality maybe not a woman or a person that actually lived, but in fact a metaphor for the Holy Grail? And is the Holy Grail actually not a metaphor for the female womb, the vagina?
Mhm. Yes, I like to believe that Yeshua and Miriam or Mary Magdalene were actual people. But then at the same time, we can believe in them as constructs like ISIS, that like these way showers who really are the kind of ideology for an energy. Um, I think the fact that that Mary Magdalene is coming back so powerfully now, and I see so much of it, on Instagram and amongst my fellow spiritual community. It's huge, huge, huge now. The whole healing of the feminine, the womb awakening that's happening, and the way in which Mary Magdalene is coming through in such a powerful way, is, I think, bringing us back to the feminine, which has to be rebalanced, which has to be cleansed and has to be reappreciated. But personally, what I found really interesting when I went to Mary Magdalene's place of her, where she lived for the last 30 years of her life, apparently in the hills in France, is that I felt that connecting with her really brought me back to Yeshua. And I think that a lot of what Mary's work was to support Yeshua, certainly with the tantric work that she did with him as a priestess of Isis. And I think what Magdalene is now coming back to do, or the Magdalenes are coming back now, is to help us heal the feminine, to unite back with the divine masculine, so that we can once again unite both of those forces in the incredibly powerful potency of unity. And a lot of that is around sexual union. And a lot of the Magdalene's message, I feel, is about that tantric sexual power that is possible when people unite physically. We know that a lot of what Mary Magdalene and Yeshua were doing as a couple was creating a vortex of energy through their sexual energy. And we see again how this is turned on its head in society today with porn and pedophilia, which they're trying to make pedophilia sound not so awful these days. There's a sort of a new movement for that as well. So I think for me personally, it's, as I say, about a rebalancing, and then to bring us back to the unity of the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine.
The divine feminine, TC, as well truly as the suppression of the divine masculine. Also, we're not talking about the male dominance, but the divine masculine, which a lot of people, which has totally gone out the window actually these days. But I mean, the divine feminine and that potential, the female sexual power that a lot of women suppress and a lot of men don't understand and perhaps also suppress, is that the real reason for the suppression of women throughout the ages, TC?
I think certainly the power of women, the power of the earth, the void. You see, this is what's so interesting, is that the feminine aspect is the darkness, is the void, and it is chaos, and it is out of that blackness, that chaos, that life comes. And I think that it has a lot to do with fear of death, of the darkness, which is the womb out of which life comes. And in an effort to escape that, to rise up to the sky god, to escape this heavy primordial ooze that is the feminine, that is the creative force, the masculine has sought to push it out of the way because it is very dark. And we know even Yeshua on his journey as a way shower, he had to go into the darkness, into the death, to resurrect, to show us that actually the way to rise is to actually go into the darkest places within you, to go into death. All of these voyages of the soul always go into the underworld. You know, the myth of Persephone, the myth of Inanna, is all about having to go into those dark places. And the feminine does represent the dark. You know, right column is the male energy, left column is the feminine energy, and the left column is often seen as you know, as a dark place. And so I think that it comes out of fear, the suppression of the feminine, and a desire to subjugate it to yes, out of a feeling that it is, you know, quite a fearful place, and a desire to be more powerful than. And so there's this reversal of the power of the womb in terms of these sacrifices rather than this honoring of the earth. So an escape plan, out the roof, out to the sky god, rather than falling down into the earth, falling down into the womb, into the place of darkness, into the place of nothingness. I mean, I don't think any of us are comfortable with truly going into the darkest places within us, into the nothingness, into darkness, into death. And yet that's what the feminine is asking us to do, is to truly give ourselves over to that, so that we can then become really powerful beings. So I think that is the secret, that is the key, that is the grail, is to understand that circle of life.
But do you think that the free-flowing female sexuality is more powerful than the male sexuality, unbeknownst to many, obviously?
Well, look, you know, the yoni in itself has tens of thousands more pleasurable centers to it than the lingam does. That's just the way of it. But it's the way in which we engage in sex which stops us from accessing this incredibly powerful unification of male and female. When the male truly understands how to unite with the female and ride the feminine energies through the orgasm of the feminine, riding that caduceus, the snakes of sexual kundalini, when the male understands how to ride that, then he becomes part of that incredibly powerful energy, and one needs the other. It's not necessarily that one is more powerful, they each need each other, but certainly the feminine forms what they call the magnetic floor, which is what they called it in the Isis teachings, in the sexual magic teachings that the Magdalens would have studied. And it's through this magnetic floor that Yeshua would have trained when he went to India. And in fact, it's said that Yeshua married a woman in India and has a lineage in India. And so he would have understood the tantric practices before he met Mary Magdalene. So he would not only have had that practice, but would have united with Mary. And you can only, appreciate that must have been a very cosmic coming together when they did. So I do think one needs the other. We each have our power to bring to the table.
It's the balance of all of it, yes. Paul, my question, Mary Magdalene, and you were a minister in England for so many years. Was she a real person, or is she really a metaphor for the Holy Grail? And did the Holy Grail not exist at all as well, and is a metaphor for the female womb?
Well, I agree with TC. I see Mary Magdalene as both. I do believe Mary Magdalene was a real historic person, but by the time we're encountering her within literature, within the Gnostic Gospels in particular, she stands for something bigger than herself. But even as a person, there's a huge significance to her absence from the canonical Gospels. She's not completely absent. She does get named, but not like she's named in the Gnostic literature. And we mentioned the Council of Nicaea earlier. Actually, by the time we get to the Council of Nicaea in the 300s, the suppression of the divine feminine had been going on for about more than 1,000 years by that point. It had been happening within Judaism since the 8th century BCE. And then within Christianity, we see it happening really with the removal of Mary Magdalene from the picture. Because in the beginning, Christianity comprised a whole kaleidoscope of gospels, writings, theologies, experiences. And in the Gnostic material, Mary Magdalene had a far more prominent position. First of all, Jesus and Mary were an item, according to the Gospel of Philip. She was the one that Jesus used to kiss frequently on and then the word has been scratched out, but on the mouth is what it originally said. They were an item, and they were a teaching item. There was the female teacher, Mary the Tower, and there was Jesus the teacher. And this was the package that was presented on the Gnostic side of things. And what happened in the 300s was the church decided it was going to create a canon of authoritative Christian literature, and it wouldn't include those books. So Mary disappears, and it's part of the process by which the Roman Empire hijacked Christianity and said what it would now be teaching and what the acceptable books were. And it was, in fact, I think before the Council of Nicaea, there was a particular emperor who settled a theological debate with an imperial stroke of a pen, indicating that henceforward the emperor was now at the top of the tree in deciding doctrine. So it was the emperor and then the bishops and then the people. And by that point, what you've got is an imperial religion. Once again, it's a masculinized form of religion, just like the Jewish kings had taken the masculine Yahweh, and that was going to be the religion of their kingdom. So the Roman Empire did exactly the same thing. And I think by taking Mary out of the picture, first of all, you sort of desexualized Jesus. So instead of being a bloke in a relationship with a woman, he's just this solitary figure. And so we lose a sense of connection, I think, with Jesus at that point. There's something very powerful about Jesus and Mary being a couple and how we feel about them and how we listen to them. And I think when you take away the feminine and present only the masculine as the model, only the masculine as the teacher, you've actually assaulted not only women, you've assaulted human beings. Because how do I, as a man, do everything that TC was just describing in the bedroom if I'm going to be afraid of femininity, either in my partner or in myself? How am I going to understand my sexuality, my mind, my thinking, my experience of life, my experience of emotions, my parenting, my work, if I'm all the time trying to calculate how to do it without any feminine input from others or from my own brain? How do you do that? How do you second guess that whole process? I think to remove the feminine is really a profound assault on the intelligence, the experience, and certainly the sexuality of all human beings. And it caught my eye when I was doing research for Echoes of Eden that groups which had sought to recover the Mary Magdalene tradition within Christianity had turned out to be very interesting and very powerful groups. And that includes the Cathars, of course, because the Cathars took a lot of inspiration from that Gnostic literature and turned it into a lifestyle that produced a society that was a wonder to medieval Europe. They were called the Cathars because they were the good people. They were the healthy society in a Europe that was absolutely dominated by crime and murder and disorder. And there's this bubble of wonderfulness, the Cathars. Now, having said that, I wouldn't choose to be a Cathar because actually, to be a really good Cathar, you have to sort of become that celibate type that we now see Jesus as. So there was something in the mix, I think, was not 100%. But what they were doing their best to do was to run with the full kaleidoscope of wisdom that was in the roots of Christianity and not buy into all these decisions that had pushed these other scriptures and pushed Mary Magdalene and pushed the divine feminine out of the picture.
So, whether you believe Mary Magdalene was a real person or you believe it's a metaphor, it's still, as I hear you say as well, Paul, it's still that energy that is being brought in massively right now on planet Earth. It is a manifestation now of the divine feminine energy and the sexual energy as well as a good, powerful thing for union, right?
That's right. And I think one of the reasons that Mary Magdalene is reappearing, so to speak, is that we have just felt so starved of the divine feminine that it has really been led by that feeling of bereavement. And when people read the Gnostic literature and discover Mary Magdalene, the teacher, Mary Magdalene, the tower, there's almost like a feeling of, oh my goodness, thank goodness I finally found this, because we've felt the lack of her and the lack of what she's represented through all these ages.
TC, talk about non-human interference in economics and politics and in other fields. I do believe, Paul, this was what you actually mentioned also previously. Non-human interference. Do you think that means AI, artificial intelligence, or is it aliens and ETs, for example, that are interfering on planet Earth as well? Or is it this takeover of AI?
I think I'm going to refer to Rav Berg on this one, who was the head of the Kabbalah Center until he passed in 2013 or 2014. And he always said that the human brain is so much more powerful than any computer. And I think, as we touched on earlier, I agree that our power is almost untapped or has been forgotten or has been subjugated out of us. We're so influenced by what we see and what we hear, etc., as we've touched on. So I think for me, AI is laziness, and it is mankind trying to well, basically mankind has been dehumanized so that they don't realize their power, as I touched on earlier, this superhuman aspect that I believe we have within us. So we're giving all our power away, is what I feel, And I think the human being is so incredibly powerful, as the Rav did. The potential is so enormous that we don't even realize it. As I said earlier, it's touched on in the Bible where they could fly, where we had the ability to see into the future. All of these aspects of humanity which seem to have been dumbed down. So for me, it's just pure laziness, and the idea of moving further and further into a world of AI where we put on goggles and we go into an augmented reality. For me, this is such a beautiful, powerful, gorgeous planet. I mean, I can't imagine. I look at the peacock. We have a peacock that visits us most evenings, and he just spreads that tail, and I'm like, thank you, all that is, Mother, Father, God, because this planet is so incredible when you think about all of the intricacies of nature and the human body, our heartbeat that is pumping. And, it just seems like what we have is such a miracle. Why are we trying to create anything else? It just seems like madness to me. So rather than commenting on, is there, AI or interference, for me, just in terms of what's happening now, I see it as laziness, and I see it as trying to dumb down what is the most divine planet and the most divine species. So that's what I would say.
So do you think that we are able to not be entangled in that AI web if we've become more aware, so to speak, people like you and me and a lot of and all of us and the viewers watching.
Going back to what we said earlier, and Paul and I were both saying that we're quite surprised, and I'm really surprised by how many people really don't like the idea of AI. And somebody said to me, or I heard a spiritual person say recently, that the problem with AI is creating the AI the way that we have, is we are creating it as a slave technology. And we know that anything that is a slave will seek to rebel. So we're just creating problems for ourselves. If we created AI as a free sentient being, I think, maybe that's quite interesting as an add-on for, for the sake of, I don't know, not everyday life, but maybe, something additional. But I think the problem is that we're creating this as a slave entity. And I saw the creator, the Microsoft creator, talk about the new headsets and where it was going recently. And the journalist said to him, "So where do you see this going?" And he said, "I don't know. We just follow the tech." So really, the terrifying thing is we are in the hands of people who don't even bloody know where we're going, haven't really thought this out. So, God protect us from, good Lord, Mother, Father, God protect us from so-called white coat professionals, because they really don't know what they're doing. They really haven't thought this out at all.
So, Paul, non-human interference in economics and politics, is it AI that you're talking about? And what are your thoughts on this?
It's actually quite a big section of my book, The Invasion of Eden. And I go back to a researcher in the 1600s in Aberfoyle, Scotland, a Presbyterian minister by the name of Robert Kirk, he was a Bible translator. And like myself, he found that his Bible translating got him into some trouble because he was giving interpretations that were too true to the root meanings of the words, didn't sound quite religious enough, and didn't fit the familiar religious stories, and suggested some other kinds of reality, other kinds of being, other kinds of interference. But he just went with where the data led him in the ancient Hebrew. And somehow or other, in that very conservative world, he got away with it. He was able to publish his books with these translations in them. The other thing he did that I relate to is he listened to the local law. The Celtic people who lived in Aberfoyle, Scotland, had been experiencing close encounter phenomena for generations and generations. And so he followed that data. And he published a book called The Secret Commonwealth, in which he argued that until we recognize there is a non-human layer to the governance of Project Earth and Project Humanity, we won't fully understand what's going on. And he said the clue that you've got some non-human interference will be in policies that appear to have no compassion in them towards ordinary human beings. So if you've got policies coming out decade after decade that seem to advantage nobody there's no fellow feeling for ordinary people in the outcomes of these policies, there's a little clue. And so his thought was, if what you're seeing is a machinization of your world, of your social order, of your economics, then it's probably the case you've got some strings being pulled by beings that don't have any empathy with us because they're not human. So that's where he went. But where I go in The Invasion of Eden is listening to even more ancestral narratives around the world. And I found some real wisdom in a friend of mine who's a traditional healer who lives on the island of Molokai, part of Hawaii. And he talks about this when he talks about the ancient experiences of colonization. He talks about the economy and politics moving in a direction that disadvantages ordinary people, disempowers them, makes them feel like cogs in some great big machine. And his answer to this was that in every age, we can always find ways of working for one another instead of working for the big machine, of serving one another instead of always serving the higher ups, of learning to be more human in a less human environment. He talked about living from the heart rather than from the mind, living from love rather than from fear. And he said, if we're proactive in these kinds of ways, we can thrive even in quite toxic environments because we're creating our own environment. I remember that this phrase stuck with me when I was we call them a servo in Australia. It's where you go and fuel your car up. And it was full of people at the end of the tourist season, fueling up to drive home. Everyone was in a bad mood because they were driving home from their holiday homes, and they were in a long queue waiting to pay for their fuel. And I watched the guys serving the customers. There's only one guy serving, and every conversation was happy and positive. The person left with a smile. And I commented, I said, how are you doing this? How do you have this wonderful energy? And he said, well, I grew up in a very toxic environment, and I decided when I was about 20, I didn't want my future to be like that. So I have the attitude now, I have to create my own environment. And this is the environment I like to create. And it was just a little picture for me that even an individual can create an environment. And I think we need to help each other, look to one another, serve each other, love each other, look out for one another, recognize that the general patterns of our life are very often distressing economically, distressing psychologically. We need to step in and help each other when we see that someone else is under the pump. And I believe in all these ways, we can actually learn to thrive and prosper even in an environment where we would appear not to have a lot of control. I think we've got a lot more control over our social and life environment than we give ourselves credit for. And these were the avenues that our ancestors pointed us in the ancient stories. And so even in a world where I see people becoming the slaves of AI and decision-making being taken over by AI, I feel we're still humans. We're still beautiful, creative people, full of imagination and compassion. And that's what we need to champion. And I love that you mentioned the peacock. We have peacocks here, TC, as well, who hang around our house on a daily basis. And what's so beautiful about them is they know they're beautiful. And they know showing themselves to us, they're being appreciated. They love displaying themselves. It gives them pleasure even before anyone else has noticed how magnificent they are. And I think as creative, compassionate human beings, we need to go at life with exactly that kind of attitude.
Amazing. And you talk about creating your own environment, which is basically really what people should do now and need to do in order to break away, not just from the mental prison that we are in at the moment, but also the physical prison. And not everybody can just move out to the country and grow their own food and whatever. But I mean, there's a lot of people that are challenged in this day and age, but creating your own environment. Some people use meditation, for example. I don't know if, and meditation is used in various forms. Do you both exercise meditation? And if yes, what has it done for you? Did you get any visions or downloads, if you will, or any mind expanding experiences? Or, I mean, people can really, without using mind-expanding drugs, they can really go into an altered state if they use meditation properly. Paul, we can begin with you.
Well, these days, my meditation is to be in nature as much as I can every day. I'm very lucky that I can do that where I live. I can get out onto the beach every day if I want to. Getting sunlight on my skin, deep breathing, so that's controlled, conscious breathing, walking barefoot on the ground, and enjoying all the sense experience of that. For me, that's my main form of meditation these days. And I find when I do it, it's just like hitting a reset button. And I can be full of thoughts and anxieties before my walk, but I won't be in that state at the end of my walk. And so that's the one that I'm actually practicing at the moment. But in the past, through controlled conscious breathing, yes, you're right, Lucas, that is when I get downloads. That's when I get fresh thoughts. That's when I think my guides come alongside me and whisper wisdom into my ear.
Fascinating. And TC, you've been living all over the world in some amazing places, but I guess you're in the country now in Britain. What does that do for you? And also please address my question about meditation and how you've experienced it if you exercise it.
Yeah, I agree with Paul that nature is the greatest healer, and to connect to nature is without a doubt, I believe, possibly the greatest thing we can do without going into the energies of positive and negative and how earthing is so important for the body, which is a whole other discussion. But certainly every day, I do my prayers, I do my sutras, I do yoga. So for me, it is a daily practice, and I think without connecting to my body physically with yoga, connecting to peace of mind with the sutras, that really helps me, I think, to stay centered. I am an air sign, so I tend to go up here and lose myself. So I need to really focus my energies every day and earth myself. So for me, it's a very important practice.
Hmm. So in our remaining moments, we are at a crossroad, even if you already walked down this road, this path of enlightenment, if you will. I mean, we still have choices to make right now. What is your best advice for people watching this right now and hearing all of your wonderful thoughts, both of you? I mean, many people fear the future, even the present wars, the fear of a third world war, the implementation of AI, the 15-minute cities, a new world order regime. Your final thoughts on solution and hope, TC.
Turn off the television. Turn off the TV. That's, all these channels are owned by three old farts, and they're telling you what's going on in the world. And be in your joy. From what I understand from spiritual practitioners, that being in our highest state of joy is how we truly help the planet, and then we help each other through that connectivity with the divine, with Mother, Father, God. We're drawing down that energy for all. So by being in a state of joy and being in our highest state of positive energy and positive thought, we're helping everybody else. We are all connected as one. So if we're doing our work to be the best version of ourselves that we can be, then it's a knock-on effect. So doing our work, trying to stay positive, being in certainty, I think that is the key. We don't know everything. We don't know anything, So ultimately, for me, I just try and do the best I can to be the best person I can be, to connect to my highest potential for the highest good of all.
That's wonderful. Paul, your final thoughts on
Yeah.
solution and hope.
I would just echo what TC has said. I was going to say exactly the same thing about turning the TV off. If you're out in nature, then you're not plugged into the matrix via the TV or the radio or your news feed. So that really is a bread and butter thing, to get out into nature every day as best as you possibly can, and then to be very intentional about your mental and emotional state from day to day, as much as it is in your power. When you get up in the morning, before you get out of bed, before you walk out your front door, decide what energy you want to put out into the world. Decide how you want people to feel after they have a conversation with you today, and project that energy. Because if you're intentional about it, it will be a positive energy. And if you put out a positive energy, it will be reflected back to you, and you and everyone else around you will have a better day. And when you're in that state of mind, you're far harder to oppress and manipulate. So stay in that space is what I would say.
Turn off your television and be intentional.
Exactly.
TC, to end our wonderful and fascinating roundtable discussion, would you please read your poem about AI?
Thank you. And I just want to say it's been such a pleasure talking to you both. Just so much love to you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely the same.
This is called Man-Made Machine and Machine Remade Man. I spy with my little AI something beginning with mankind. My sell-by, pass-by, palm tree, palm tree, palm tree. I am not a robot. Press send. I do not speak barcode. Do you? Click and collect. Tap and go. I am an outdated mode. This language is not my code. I am not a robot. Can you prove you're not a robot? Are you sure you're not a robot? Click send. The sentient make way for the fallen drone. My pen is my sword in this world of cyborg. I measure out my life in digitized teaspoons. Will I tell? Nobody. I might never remember when we used to walk through true woods, breathe fresh air, not these dark hieroglyphs spinning fake coins, roads that lead nowhere on a fake highway, fear-feeding apps and Snapchat, man-made in the image of a machine. Eliminated by encrypted design, one day soon stuffed next to Cro-Magnon, a museum piece, DNA on show, that divine strand desiccated, infiltrated in the radiated light of day, where everyone thinks the same way. TikTok becomes no clock, your cells nanotech, your mind a food fed on by digital access codes, spooling ionized spores, your font grafted, your eyes once the windows of the soul, now the Windows program. Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful. It was such a joy
Thank
here
you.
again. Paul,
Thank you, TC.
this couldn't possibly be the last time that you two meet up here. I would love to do a second round at some point with the two of you. It's been absolutely wonderful. I really love it and enjoy it, and it's been such a pleasure seeing both of you here. And I knew it would be very, very special, and indeed it has been. So, Paul, just before we end here, please tell the viewers how they can obtain a copy and purchase your book, The Invasion of Eden, or to contact you.
Sure. Go to Amazon for The Invasion of Eden, and you'll find all my Eden books there. You can find me at paulanthonywallis.com. That's my website, and you can send messages to me through that. And you can watch me on video at fifthkind.tv and the Paul Wallis channel on YouTube.
Wonderful. And TC, I do hope that you will release a book of all of your wonderful poems, because you've written many, and they keep coming, and they're absolutely extraordinary. Are you contemplating doing that?
Yeah, I'm trying to find a publisher at the moment. So if anybody knows anybody who would like to publish my work, please let me know. Contact me at
tcarkle.com. tcarkle.com.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And also, maybe if people want to invite you as a guest on their show, maybe they can contact you as well.
It was so lovely, really, really
Great.
lovely to meet you, Paul, and always such a gorgeous host, Lucas. So thank you for getting us together.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I have a very special feeling and connection with both of you. And I just thought, wow, this would be very powerful, putting the two of you together. And as I knew, the time's running fast when, wonderful minds meet up and just simply talk.
I find it amazing. The three of us have all reached a very similar page from very different start points and taken very different routes. And yet we find ourselves in the same rabbit warren, so to speak.
Yeah, I do think it sort of solidifies that idea that we're all becoming one in our thinking and waking up to these really powerful conclusions. So yeah, it is a real marker of that, isn't it?
It really is. It's exciting. But it's funny, from the first time you interviewed me, I came off that interview and I thought, now, why did I feel so connected with Lucas? Because we were coming from quite different angles as we spoke. And it was funny, as soon as I discovered you were a Tina Turner fan, I thought, all right, there's something here. I think we've got something in common here. And just discovering that little fact, I don't know, I just there's something very humanizing about finding a little detail like that. And I think it relates to what you were saying, TC, about there only being 600,000 souls. And the way I experience that is, from time to time, I meet somebody and I'll just know very quickly, we're on the same team. And we might not have met before in this life, but we are connected and our work is connected, and we're actually here to encourage each other.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, I hope to maybe talk to you guys again when I get back from Mary Magdalene. Maybe I'll have some insights from that trip. We're going to Mount Bugarak as well, which is supposed to be somewhere where a lot of sightings of ETs has taken place. It's like an inverted mountain, and of course the Cathars around that area were known to have lived. So I'm hoping to get some downloads from that trip. So really looking forward.
Let's definitely do that.
Because we're going, there's two places. There's the cave, there's the church where her skull is, which is about half an hour from the cave, the main cave. And then there's a cave of eggs as well, which I didn't go to last time, which is a much more hidden cave. It's supposed to be even more powerful. But I mean, when I came back last time, we talk about these kind of sacred sites and the power of pilgrimage. I'm completely convinced of that now because I came back changed. I didn't want to leave the site. The site was so powerful. So yes, I will certainly come back and give you let you know what happened on this next voyage of discovery.
Yeah, that's gonna
Wonderful.
that would be great, huh, Paul? And then we have a lot more
Yes, of
topics and
course.
stuff we can just talk about, of
Well,
course.
look, have a beautiful evening, Paul, and a beautiful
Thank you.
day, Lucas, and sending you guys so much love. And yes, look forward to talking again one of these days.
Likewise.
Okay.
Look forward to next time. All the best.
All the best, guys. Bye.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you. Much love to you, and I hope to see both of you very soon. Thank you for being on Age of Truth TV.
Thank you, Lucas.
Thank you.
Thank
See you next time.
Thank you so much to Paul Anthony Wallis and TC Arkle, and thanks to all of you for watching Age of Truth TV. You can support us by clicking onto our website, ageoftruth.tv. And please like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell for notifications. You can sign up for our newsletter on our website, ageoftruth.tv as well. Please also subscribe to our alternative channels on BitChute and Brighteon. Your support is greatly appreciated and very needed. On behalf of the Age of Truth TV team, we thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.